The question I get the most is no tax on overtime. When's that going to happen? No tax on Social Security. When's that going to happen? No tax on tips. When's that going to happen? When's the price of eggs going to come down? Well, for all things financial, all things when it comes to the economy, I go to the man, Dr. PhD, Vance Ginn. Vance, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, I'm doing well, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So I'm over there on the social media. I've got a pretty big following now. TikTok, oddly, is like the biggest, 850,000 or something. And the one question I get when I do a live, like late at night, is he going to do no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips? And because the left right now is saying they started the budget negotiations and none of that stuff is in there, Trump lied. So, Vance, can he do no tax on all those things? It's got to go through the legislature, right?
Right. It's got to go through the legislature. This is all part of the process, getting started with the resolution packages for what can be in the budget and trying to get things set up for a reconciliation bill that doesn't need 60 votes. They just need a simple majority. And so, none of the details are really out about it specifically what's going to be in the tax bill. The big part will be let's make the Trump tax cuts permanent. And then I think they'll try to get some of these other parts in there as well.
But can you, in layman's terms, explain reconciliation as compared to a continuing resolution or as compared to an actual budget?
Yes. So an actual budget would mean that they would have all 12 appropriations committees will come up with their budget and pass one budget, which they haven't done in like 20 years, maybe 30 years. It's been a long time. The other part of this, when you have a resolution or something like that, a resolution just says this is what we want in a budget, which is what they passed recently. And now we have a period of reconciliation where they can say, all right, we're going to reconcile what's going on with these different budget ideas. We're going to put them all into one, but this allows for them to have just a simple majority vote in the Senate compared to a 60 budget vote. And then what was the other one? There was one more that I think you asked for.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering how this thing comes together. Are we going to have an actual budget? How do you compare a budget to a continuing resolution to an actual reconciliation?
Yes. So the continuing resolution is just one. They say, hey, we can't bring a whole budget together, so we're going to kick the can down the road a couple of months. And so they've been doing that for most of the last years now. Years, Joe. It's ridiculous. They can't pass a simple budget. In places like Texas where I live, they have to pass a budget. That's the one thing they're constitutionally required to do. Yet Congress can't get their act together. But right now, this part is a resolution to do something with the Trump tax cuts. I know the president has talked about one big bill. And so I think that's really what they're going to look for to put all this stuff in with taxes. Probably is going to be some money in there for national defense, border security, and energy. And so those would be what we're looking for there.
It is Vance Ginn, PhD, former chief economist for the Trump White House at Trump 45. VanceGinn.com. It's GINN.com. So isn't it constitutionally required that they come up with a budget? How is it that they keep on doing continuing resolutions? Is that constitutional? As you said, it's kicking the can down the road, but maybe for a few months. This has been years and years and years and years. Aren't they going against exactly the provision that the Founding Fathers said about budgeting?
Well, you would think so, but there's not a mandate that they have to pass a budget like there are across many states. So the federal government has their kind of own rules here. But so what they do instead is, like you said, pass these continuing resolutions that will say, okay, let's start it in December of 2024. Let's pass enough money that they can just keep government open basically until March 2025. And then when March gets here, they'll pass something else. I mean, I think the idea, right, if everything worked out as planned, is that they would pass a full year budget. It's just that it never happens because other things will come up. They can't agree on what should be in the full budget itself, and so they'll just keep kicking the can down the road.
How did they? And I'm sure you're not as old as I am, but I'm sure you remember, or at least you know about it. How did the Newt Gingrich-run House of Representatives get Bill Clinton to balance the budget? In fact, I think we might have had a surplus. How did that happen?
Well, the big part of that was on welfare reform. In 1996, they brought up welfare reform, and it's something that had already been started in the states. I think that's what's so important about our system of federalism is you allow for the laboratories of competition among the states to come up with good ideas, and that's what happened in Utah and a couple of other states. And Newt Gingrich and other Republicans in Congress said, you know what, let's try that here. And when they started doing that, they got folks off of the welfare recipients off the welfare rolls. And what that did was, as you might imagine, Joe, it slowed down government spending.
Right.
When you slow down government spending and at the same time had the the IT boom and everything else that was happening at that time and a long period of economic growth, it brought in more revenue. And that's when they started running a surplus for 4 years, 98, 99, 2000, and 2001 were surpluses.
Yeah, did that turn around, do you think, negatively after the attacks of 9/11, where all of a sudden the DHS was created, the Patriot Act went into place, we had to spend a lot more money in defense and go fight wars? Is that what turned it upside down?
Yeah, that's what turned it upside down. And we had a recession from March to November of 2001. So revenue also slowed down or actually declined a little bit at that time. But to your point, Joe, which is a great one, it's all about spending. We never have a revenue problem. It's always a spending problem. And that was what happened then as well. And so, the Department of Homeland Security, TSA, I mean, all the stuff that we have today when you got to get patted down going to the airport was created back during that time. And it was an emergency situation. We had 9/11 happen. And so you can understand the sort of situation they're in. But the problem is that a lot of these temporary programs became permanent government programs.
They were all supposed to sunset, and they never did. It is Vance Ginn. Go to vanceginn.com. Follow him over on X as well, Vance Ginn. As we're looking at what's going on now, when it comes to spending, let's do the deep dive. Let's go into the rabbit hole on USAID if we can. USAID, from me looking it up and learning about it, it was before my time. But in 1961, John F. Kennedy did an executive order creating this organization, this agency. Then I do believe there was some statute or some act or something that Congress did to fund it. But now we've got a situation where $38 to $40 billion of your money and mine goes into this agency now. They don't think there's any oversight. They don't think they answer to anybody. And President Trump is saying, I just get rid of it if I want to. Can he get rid of it? It was made through an executive order. Can he get rid of it through an executive order, even though there's been a statute later that was put into place to fund it?
Well, I think what the president can do, and what we've seen with DOGE and others, is that they can come in and stop contracts. They can stop the amount of spending that's happening out of there. Since it was statutory, I don't know. I think you'll need Congress to act to eliminate it entirely.
Okay.
However, I do think that there are ways to slow down how much money is going to USAID and all the other nonsense that they're doing. And I think that should be the case given the fiscal crisis that we're in. And of course, you get the left and the progressives coming out from the woodworks and saying, oh, we need to spend money on this. But they don't understand the sort of economic consequences of the fiscal crisis that we have right now. Everything should be on the chopping block in my view. There should be no sacred cows. And a big part of that is programs that are ineffective and wasteful should be cut and ultimately eliminated.
So if you wanted to, he could cancel the contracts and have the budget for USAID down to $1, something like that. I know that Marco Rubio just cut the workforce from 10,000 to 294 people, which is crazy. But he can do that. I mean, you can keep it as an agency, but just don't give it much money.
Right. And you can shift money around. Some of this money is fungible. So you don't give it to USAID, you give it to other areas where that you want it, like national defense or something like that. And so there are certainly ways that the executive branch can move money around. But I do think you'll need Congress. And Joe, I think at the end of the day, Congress should start doing their job.
Yes.
They need to pass budgets. They need to pass good, sound policies. And that way the executive branch doesn't have to do this stuff because they should have the power of the purse in Congress. It's just that they can't get their act together.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. I would love to see them actually do their job. So if the money is taken away from this program, that program, let's say we find $100 billion in fraud in the Social Security system, because a lot of people over 100 are getting checks, it turns out. What happens to that money? I think I know. I think it goes back to the House because they hold the purse strings, and something called the, what is it called? The Impoundment Act or something says they impound the money if those contracts are canceled. But then what happens to it?
Well, I mean, they can use it to appropriate elsewhere. They could cut taxes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they could do with it, but probably they're going to spend it. But it does go, like you said, it goes back to the Treasury, allows for them to have those access to funds and things of that nature. And there's a big discussion. Speaking of the Impoundment Act, I think it was 1974. There's also a big discussion about what's happening by the executive branch. So when I was even there at OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, with Russ Vogt, who's now the director again at OMB, we looked at this a lot to say, what else could the president impound and start to really rein in government spending, because there's a lot of checks and balances in our system, which is good. But at the same time, if you're expending money on extraneous things that should not be funded by government, the president should have a little bit of say on how those dollars are being spent, even as the Congress has the power of the purse.
Well, exactly, especially if it's an agency that's in the executive.
Yes.
He's the boss. He gets to decide what is and what isn't done at these agencies. It's Vance Ginn, PhD, VanceGinn.com. Go and follow him on X as well, Vance Ginn. So when it comes to all that money, the rumor that would not even a rumor, the way that it works in government is if you don't spend the money they gave you this year, they're not going to give it to you next year. So they will waste the money. Many of these agencies, and I'm not talking out of school, this happens and you know it.
Yeah.
So that they can get reapportion that money and then some next year. Baseline budgeting is what, 8% every year? They keep on going up. So if Trump and DOGE and Elon and everybody identifies a bunch of waste, could be $1 trillion. Musk was saying is 750 billion at least, if not $1 trillion, and they're still finding stuff. Can they then say next year you don't get anywhere near the money that you got this year, thus we have a smaller amount of money in taxpayer money that's being budgeted, and we might be able to start paying down the debt? Maybe we get rid of the deficit the way that it is.
Yeah. I mean, we're running
$2
trillion a year in deficits. So if we can cut $2 trillion, we could balance the budget. Cut $1 trillion, you could cut that in half. So, I mean, there are certainly ways to do this. And I think that's the right idea here is that even if you start saying they shouldn't have these contracts, they should cut the contracts and end them, that shouldn't mean that you have budget inertia is what I like to call it, where you just say baseline budgeting to your point, here's X number of dollars, we're going to increase it from there. You should say, you know what, we cut all these contracts, we saved $100 billion. We're not going to add that back in for the next budget period where you're going to lose that. And then you need to come in and explain why you need the additional dollars that you already have.
Right.
I think, Joe, this is a big part of getting back to zero-based budgeting, getting back to performance-based budgeting, is finding a way to say, first of all, are these constitutional roles for government? I happen to think that there are many areas of our government that are not constitutional and should not be funded entirely. But if they are constitutionally funded, are we meeting the goals of each one of these programs? So the performance there, and just like in the private sector, if you find areas that are not spending the way that they should be spent, you're not getting the returns that you should get, you close down that particular program and you start over. You do something else or don't do it at all. We should be doing that at the federal level as well.
Former chief economist for the Trump White House, Trump 45. It's Vance Ginn, PhD. Is there any question to the legality of even the formation of DOGE?
No.
Because, I mean, that's what the left says. It's illegal. He's an oligarch. It's not right. He's looking at our Social Security numbers. He's checking my bank account. How dare he? We no longer have a democracy. We no longer have a representative republic. Elon Musk is President Musk. And you're saying, no, that's just bunk.
Yeah, that's bunk. I mean, and by the way, if we don't want to do this and we want to go down the idea of Social Security should be paying 110, 120, 130-year-olds and have all this other fraud, waste, and abuse, how is that good for our republic? How is that good for our taxpayer dollars? And so I think this is certainly constitutional. It's certainly something that DOGE and Elon Musk and others should be able to do. And in fact, look, I've been calling for this for a long time, that we should be doing independent efficiency audits of government. And that's essentially what they're doing right now. And so I think this is a great opportunity. The left doesn't like it because they want to spend all of our money. They feel like they can do better than we can. And so we need some better checks and balances in place. And so far, that's what seems like DOGE is doing.
The only argument I've heard against DOGE is that somehow people will die of AIDS in Africa if you get rid of USAID funding. And as Trump has said, and he's a caring guy, we will take care of the funding that makes sense. We will make sure that the good things that we're doing from whatever name the agency, we're going to keep on going. But why would you want to spend $38 to $40 billion a year on Sesame Street in Baghdad or giving $3.5 million to the BBC to learn about Libyan culture? None of that makes any sense. How do you think it got this bad, do you think? I mean, the left has not yet made any argument other than the AIDS thing in Africa. No other argument has been made that this is bad that we're finding out. But the simple question to me is, how do these agencies ever get that much leeway where they could spend money just like completely nuts spending money and nobody even asks them a question about it?
It's sad, Joe. And I mean, I think look, first of all, I should say that there are going to be mistakes that they're going to make. When you're talking about a $6.5 trillion budget, and they're cutting here and there, you're going to see some mistakes, and then you find the mistake, and then you fund it again if you need to. So you correct, which is what the Democrats, the progressives don't like. They don't want to correct. They just want to keep spending more. But I think the way that we got here was because of how large the government is. And whenever it is $6.5 trillion, it's hard to find where all those dollars are going. You just start creating programs and the money starts going out the door and there's fewer checks and balances in the place. And look, we've got 3 million federal workers. 2.2 million of them are in the executive branch. And now we just had 70,000 that resigned, which is good. But there's still a lot more of them that are out there. A lot of them that are regulating, that are never elected, yet they have a lot of power. And a lot of the power goes into funding a lot of things that shouldn't be funded and a lot of taxpayers don't even know about. So I'm glad that the DOGE is bringing this to light.
Is there any question that the people that paid into Social Security who now deserve to get it will not be getting it? That was the second biggest question outside of taxes on tips and overtime. Will my Social Security be affected? And the answer is no, right?
Right. No, I mean, none of this stuff would affect them. I think longer term, we've got to do something for younger folks like myself who are getting on Social Security, whether or not that'll be there. But for those who are nearing retirement, I mean, there's nothing for them to be worried about with what's happening right now of what DOGE is doing, what the Trump administration is doing. And so I think that those are all just blown out of proportion.
Well, they are, and it's a scare tactic. Another one that came up last night in this live that I did was the Park Service is firing everybody, going to be garbage stacking up at our federal parks. You can't go enjoy the parks anymore. Have you heard anything about this? I mean, I don't think that Donald Trump wants dirty parks and parks that aren't manned. I'm just guessing he's seeing a bunch of redundancy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if there are redundancies, then we should be reducing and eliminating those. These are all taxpayer dollars. We've got a fiscal crisis. We need to be reducing taxes, and the way to do this is by sustainable budgeting and making sure that we're spending wisely. And so if there are redundancies, we should not be funding X, Y, and Z when you only need X. And in fact, a lot of these things, I think, Joe, should be done at the state and local level instead of having federal parks. Why don't we give it to the states or privatize some of these things? Because a lot of these land also has a lot of minerals and oil and gas and stuff underneath the ground that could be privatized and allow for more growth. The Committee to Unleash Prosperity with Steve Moore, Phil Kerpen, and others, they recently just put out a report that said we have about $12 trillion in assets underneath federal lands that we could sell. We could pay off a lot of our debt that way as well.
$12 trillion, and people are complaining about us going and getting our God-given resources. It's Vance Ginn. Go to vanceginn.com. Is it at Vance Ginn over on X?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, go there and go follow him on X as well. I'm glad you came on. A lot of questions out there. A lot of people are scared. A lot of people are falling for the scare tactics on the left, and you always give the straight skinny. Vance, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Joe. Have a great day.
All right, brother. You too. We're back after this. Stay right here.